I used to park cars at a fancy hotel in Los Angeles when I was in college. Imagine standing there, holding the keys to cars worth more than your future salary, and watching how people treated their money. One guest in particular stuck with me. He was a tech genius, rich beyond imagination, the kind of guy who invented something in his 20s that you and I probably use every single day. But his relationship with money? A mess. He'd carry around bricks of cash, show them off like toys, even toss gold coins into the ocean just to see how far they'd skip. It felt like a circus act. Years later, I found out he went broke. That's the thing. Being good with money isn't really about IQ. It's about behavior. And behavior is the hardest thing in the world to manage. You can know every formula, every chart, every probability. But the moment fear, greed, or ego walks into the room, logic usually walks out. At the same time, I think of a man named Ronald Reed, a janitor, a gas station attendant, someone who lived so modestly you'd never guess he was building a fortune. He died with millions, most of which he left to his community. His secret? He saved what little he could, invested in steady companies, and just waited. Decades went by, and his money grew like a tree that nobody noticed until one day it was towering over the town square. Now contrast that with Richard Fusconi, a Wall Street hotshot. Ivy League degree, mansions, cars, the works. He lived big, borrowed even bigger, and when the financial crisis hit, everything collapsed like a house of cards. Two men, two opposite lives. And here's the kicker. The janitor beat the banker. It sounds almost unfair, but that's money for you. It doesn't care about degrees or resumes. It cares about patience, restraint, humility, which is why this book isn't about complex math or trading strategies. It's about psychology, about how your mind, your habits, your emotions shape your financial destiny more than spreadsheets ever will. Here's the strange part. Finance is usually taught like physics. Plug in the numbers, out comes the answer. But money doesn't work that way. It's closer to psychology, closer to history, closer to human drama. It's foggy, inconsistent, emotional. And the best way to understand it is through stories. That's what I want to do with you. Walk you through 20 short stories, each one shining a light on a different angle of money and behavior. None of them are complicated, but together, they tell us why people do what they do with their wallets and how you and I can make better choices. So, let's start with the first big truth. No one is crazy. Think about it. You and I can look at the same set of numbers, the same stock chart, the same breaking news headline, and see completely different realities. You might see danger. I might see opportunity. Who's right? Both of us. Because money isn't just numbers. It's memories, scars, upbringing, culture, personality. It's shaped by every little twist in your life that makes you who you are. Picture two kids growing up in different decades. One lived through the Great Depression. Their parents counted every penny, stretched meals, feared the future. That kid grows up cautious, maybe even suspicious of the stock market. The other kid grew up during a booming tech age when fortunes were made overnight. To them, risk feels exciting, almost natural. You put those two people in the same room and ask them about investing, and of course, they're going to talk past each other. Neither is crazy. They're just playing with different decks of cards life handed them. Your personal history makes up maybe a fraction of all economic history, but to you, it feels like the whole story. If inflation wrecked your parents' savings, you'll always remember that sting. If the stock market soared while you were young, you'll probably lean optimistic forever. Our experiences become anchors, pulling our decisions toward them, even if the world has changed. And that's why judging other people's financial choices is so tricky. A lottery ticket, for example. To you, it might look like a waste of money. But to someone scraping by, it's not about math. It's about hope. That ticket is a tiny, physical piece of a dream they don't otherwise get to hold. Crazy? Maybe. Understandable? Absolutely. The point is, everyone builds their own story around money, and those stories are written with different ink. Some are written in fear, some in greed, some in optimism or desperation. But every decision makes sense to the person making it at that time. The trouble is, money is still a new game. Retirement, investing, credit cards, stock markets available to ordinary people. These are babies in the timeline of history. A few generations ago, hardly anyone retired. College wasn't common. Mortgages were rare. Index funds didn't exist. So of course we stumble around and make mistakes. We're like kids learning to ride bikes without training wheels, falling over again and again. That's why money often looks like madness from the outside. But look closer, and you'll see the logic hidden in each choice. No one is crazy. They're just responding to their world in the best way they know how. And that's where the real journey begins. Because if you and I can accept that truth, that everyone has their own lens, their own fog, their own story, then we can start to understand not just money, but people. And once you get that, the next big lesson becomes clear. Luck and risk are inseparable twins. Luck and risk are like twins you can't tell apart. They look different in hindsight, but when you're living through them, they're almost the same thing. They both remind us that no matter how hard you try, you're never fully in control. Take Bill Gates. Everyone knows him as a genius, and he is. But genius wasn't the whole story. When he was a teenager, his private school in Seattle somehow managed to buy a computer terminal, one of the only high schools in the world with that luxury. This was 1968. Most universities didn't even have something like that. Bill got to practice coding every day while millions of kids his age never touched a keyboard. 1 in a million odds, and he hit it. That stroke of luck set the stage for Microsoft. Gates himself has said, no Lakeside, no Microsoft. Now flip the coin. His best friend Ken Evans was just as bright, just as ambitious. The two of them were already plotting out future companies in middle school. But Kent died in a mountaineering accident before graduation. Same age, same talent, same school, same obsession, different fate. Luck gave Gates Microsoft. Risk took Ken away. That's how life works. For every dazzling success you see on a magazine cover, there's another person just as capable who fell on the wrong side of the dice. You can't believe in luck without respecting risk. They're inseparable. And yet, people are uncomfortable admitting how much luck shapes success. It feels rude to tell a billionaire they got lucky. It feels demoralizing to admit to yourself that maybe chance had more to do with your wins than brilliance did. But think about it. If 1 billion people invest, odds are a handful of them will become billionaires just by rolling the dice at the right time. Of course, luck is there. We just don't like to say it out loud. The same goes for failure. It's tempting to look at someone who went bankrupt and sneer, they made dumb choices. Sometimes that's true. But sometimes it's just risk rearing its head. You can make a perfectly reasonable bet, one with an 80% chance of winning, and still land in the unlucky 20%. Was that a bad decision or just reality? Hard to tell. And we're bad at living with that kind of uncertainty. That's why we love clean stories. Vanderbilt broke the rules and it made him rich. Rockefeller bent the law and it made him a legend. Easy to say it was skill. But what if luck simply shielded them from consequences? What if the exact same behavior could have landed them in jail or bankrupted them, and history would have written them off as fools instead of geniuses? The line between bold and reckless is razor thin, and you usually only see it after the fact. Even Benjamin Graham, Warren Buffett's mentor, built much of his fortune off a single bet on Geico. He broke his own rules about diversification. Was that brilliance or luck? He himself admitted he couldn't tell. One big break can look like supreme wisdom, or just being in the right place at the right time. So, what's the takeaway? Be careful who you praise and careful who you condemn. Don't assume every success is pure skill or every failure is pure stupidity. Outcomes are noisy. Life's a casino where effort matters, but dice are still rolling in the background. The safer approach is to study broad patterns instead of idolizing extreme examples. Because the bigger and more extreme the story, the more luck and risk are probably tangled in it. You can't copy Buffett. You can't copy Gates. But you can notice that people who stay in the game long enough, who leave themselves room to survive mistakes, tend to do better over time. That's a pattern you can use. I once wrote my son a letter telling him, "Don't judge people too harshly. Some are born into rich, supportive families. Others are born into war zones. Some start with safety nets. Others don't even have shoes. Hard work matters, but it doesn't explain everything. Laziness exists, but so does bad luck. Remember that when you look at others and when you look at yourself. Because here's the truth. Nothing is ever as good or as bad as it seems." And that brings us to the next lesson. One of the most dangerous forces in finance. The idea that enough is never enough. There's a story John Bogle once told that has stuck with me ever since. He was at a party thrown by a billionaire. Kurt Vonnegut leaned over to Joseph Heller, the guy who wrote Catch-22, and said, "Our host made more money today than you've earned in your whole life from that book." Heller didn't flinch. He just said, "Yes, but I have something he'll never have, enough." That word, enough, is so simple it almost feels boring. But it's dynamite. Most financial disasters, most ruined reputations, most broken lives come from not knowing when enough is enough. Take Rajat Gupta. Born poor in India, orphaned young, clawed his way up to become CEO of McKinsey, sitting on the boards of the biggest companies in the world. By his 40s, he had everything. Power, fame, a net worth of $100 million. He could have coasted through life, admired, respected, wealthy beyond need. But he wanted more. He wanted billionaire status. That hunger drove him to pass insider tips that made his hedge fund buddy millions. He got caught, went to prison, and lost it all. Then there's Bernie Madoff. Before his infamous Ponzi scheme, he already had a legitimate, thriving business. His market-making firm was printing tens of millions a year. He had wealth, respect, influence. More than enough, but it wasn't enough for him. He built the biggest fraud in history and burned everything to ash. Here's the crazy part. Both men could have lived out their lives as legends. But they reached for more, and in reaching, they fell. And it's not just criminals. Long-term capital management was a hedge fund filled with Nobel Prize winners. These were men worth tens or hundreds of millions personally. They had it made. But enough wasn't in their vocabulary. They leveraged themselves so hard in search of more that they blew up spectacularly, nearly taking the global financial system down with them. Warren Buffett said it best. They risked what they had and needed for what they didn't have and didn't need. That's not ambition. That's madness. The problem is that enough feels like settling. Like you're leaving opportunity on the table. But that's backwards. Enough is realizing that chasing every last dollar eventually puts everything at risk. Your freedom, your reputation, your relationships. What good is more if you lose the things that actually matter? Think about how social comparison warps this. A rookie baseball player making $500,000 a year is rich by any standard. But if he's sharing a locker room with a superstar making $30 million, suddenly he feels small. That superstar compares himself to hedge fund billionaires. Those billionaires compare themselves to Buffett. Buffett looks at Bezos. Bezos probably compares himself to, who knows, maybe no one, because the ladder never ends. That's the trap. The finish line keeps moving. You never feel like you've arrived. The only way to win that game is not to play it. The only way to stay sane is to step off the treadmill and decide, this is enough. Because enough isn't about being conservative or lazy. It's about protecting what's priceless. Your reputation, your freedom, your time with people you love. These are things no amount of money can replace once they're gone. Gupta lost his reputation. Madoff lost his freedom. Countless others lose their health or their families chasing more. The irony is, the simplest path to enough is also the safest path to wealth. Save, invest patiently, and avoid risks that could wipe you out. You don't have to swing for the fences. You just have to stay in the game. And that brings us to the next big secret of money, the one that feels so simple people almost laugh at it, until they realize it's the most powerful force in finance: compounding. Ice ages might seem like the farthest thing from money, but they teach us something essential. The Earth has swung through multiple cycles of deep freeze and thaw. At first, scientists thought it took massive forces, volcanic eruptions, mountain ranges rising, to create such extremes. But the real trigger? Something deceptively small. Slight changes in the tilt of Earth's orbit. Freedom is the highest dividend money pays. Not yachts. Not mansions. Not Rolexes. It's the ability to wake up in the morning and say, I'll spend today how I want. Think about it. If you're rich on paper but chained to a schedule you hate, are you really wealthy? If your calendar belongs to everyone but you, money is just decoration. True wealth is autonomy. This is what so many people miss when they chase status symbols. The car, the house, the title, they're signals, not freedom. Freedom is being able to say no, to walk away, to avoid the meeting, the boss, the gig, the nonsense. Freedom is the gap between your obligations and your desires, and it doesn't take billions. It takes margin. Enough cushion that you can choose how you spend your time. That might mean turning down a job you don't want, or working part-time instead of grinding 80 hours, or simply deciding that today you'll sit in the park with a book instead of checking your email. That's freedom. When you look back at your life, what will matter most isn't how much you earn, but how much of your time was your own. Think of retirement. The appeal isn't the absence of work, it's the presence of choice, the option to keep working or not. The option to spend more hours with family, with hobbies, with rest. And here's the kicker. You don't have to wait until you're old to feel this. Every dollar you save is a piece of future independence. Every bit of financial margin buys back a sliver of your time. Over years, that builds into real autonomy. Of course, the world will keep tempting you with shinier prizes. Luxury cars, bigger homes, promotions with strings attached. But the deeper truth is, freedom is the ultimate luxury. And unlike the car or the house, it doesn't depreciate. It compounds. Which leads us to a strange paradox. The very things people buy to signal wealth often end up hiding the fact that real wealth is invisible. Picture a shiny car rolling down the street. Heads turn. People notice. They admire the car. But here's the paradox. Almost no one is actually admiring the driver. They're imagining themselves in that seat. They're thinking, if I had that car, people would admire me. But the truth is, they don't care about the person inside. They care about what it would feel like if they were inside. That's the man in the car paradox. We spend fortunes chasing things we think will make people respect us, when in reality, those things just make people fantasize about themselves. You think you're buying admiration. What you're really buying is invisibility. This isn't just about cars. It's the house in the fancy neighborhood, the watch on your wrist, the designer clothes. They feel like status, but status doesn't transfer the way you hope. People are too busy projecting themselves into your stuff to think about you. The irony is, what actually earns respect is almost the opposite. Humility, kindness, generosity, quiet confidence. But those don't come with a receipt. They don't show up in Instagram posts. They can't be bought. The problem is, the desire for respect is deeply human. We all want to feel important, admired, validated. Money seems like the shortcut to that. But the paradox reveals the trap. The harder you chase visible wealth, the more you risk undermining the invisible traits that actually command respect. Here's the twist. When you finally grasp this, you realize the best use of money isn't to display it, but to hide it. To quietly build wealth that buys freedom, security, peace of mind, things nobody sees but you feel every day. And that leads right into the next idea. Real wealth isn't the stuff you show off. It's what you don't see. Wealth is what you don't see. That's the part people forget. The flashy car, the designer bag, the beach house on Instagram. Those aren't wealth. Those are spending. Wealth is invisible. It's the money not spent, the investments quietly compounding, the options building up behind the curtain. The problem is, invisibility makes it hard for our brains to value. You see someone in a $200,000 car and think, they must be rich. Maybe, or maybe they're broke, drowning in debt, desperate to look successful. You don't see their bank account. You don't see their stress. You don't see whether they're one paycheck away from collapse. Meanwhile, the person driving a 10-year-old Honda might be sitting on millions. But no one claps when they pull up at the stoplight, because real wealth is hidden. It's the freedom, the independence, the resilience that money quietly provides. This is why so many people get trapped in performative wealth. They want to look rich instead of be rich. They confuse cash flow with net worth, income with stability. And the world cheers them on until it doesn't. The key shift is realizing that every dollar you don't spend is a choice. It's stored energy. It's the option to say no later, the option to walk away, the option to sleep at night. That's the stuff that matters. Wealth is options. It's security. It's time. It's not the car. It's the ability to choose whether you even need a car. It's not the big house. It's the ability to live wherever you want without worry. And that's why the single most powerful thing you can do with money isn't investing in some hot stock or chasing the perfect trade. It's much simpler. It's saving. Saving money doesn't get nearly enough credit. Everyone obsesses over investing. What stock to pick? What fund to buy? What strategy is best? But the truth is, saving is the foundation. It's the quiet, underrated superpower that makes everything else possible. Why? Because saving isn't about math. It's about flexibility. It's the difference between being forced into decisions and being free to make them. When you save, you buy yourself time. You buy yourself options. You buy yourself breathing room. Think about it. A lot of financial advice tells you to optimize. Chase the highest returns. Squeeze every last basis point out of your portfolio. But here's the thing. The highest returns are meaningless if you don't have savings to put to work in the first place. Or if you're forced to sell at the wrong time because you had no cushion. Saving works like a shock absorber. Life will always surprise you. Layoffs, medical bills, sudden opportunities. If you've saved, you're ready. If you haven't, you're cornered. And that cornered feeling is where panic and bad decisions are born. The beauty of saving is that it doesn't require brilliance. You don't need to predict markets or outsmart anyone. You just need to live below your means and keep stacking away the difference. The more you save, the less you're at the mercy of luck. The less dependent you are on the kindness of bosses, the whims of the economy, or the mood of investors. And here's another piece. Saving gives you control over your time. When you're living paycheck to paycheck, your boss owns your calendar. When you've got savings, you get to say no. You get to choose. That's freedom disguised as a bank balance. Of course, saving isn't glamorous. Nobody brags about their emergency fund. There's no Instagram filter for frugality. But behind every story of financial independence, there's a long, quiet history of someone consistently saving while no one was watching. And the irony? You don't need a precise reason to save. You don't need to know exactly what the money will be for. The act itself, the habit, is enough. Because the future is unpredictable. The only guarantee is that opportunities and emergencies will come. Saving prepares you for both. Which brings us to a subtle but powerful idea. When it comes to money, being merely reasonable often beats trying to be perfectly rational. People love to think of money as a math problem. Optimize this, calculate that, maximize every fraction of a percent. But here's the twist. People don't live rational lives. They live reasonable ones. And when it comes to money, reasonable usually wins. Rational is what a spreadsheet tells you to do. Reasonable is what lets you sleep at night. Rational says you should invest every penny in the highest return asset, never mind the ups and downs. Reasonable says you should keep some cash aside, even if it earns nothing, because having that cushion makes you feel safe. Take housing. The math might say renting and investing the difference is smarter. But for many people, owning a home gives emotional security, stability, and pride. That's not rational on paper, but it's reasonable in life. And it works because people who feel safe are less likely to panic sell or make reckless moves. The danger with pure rationality is that it assumes we're robots. But money isn't physics. It's psychology. If a strategy looks brilliant, but you can't stick with it in practice, it's useless. A good enough plan you'll actually follow beats a perfect plan you'll abandon the first time it gets rough. Reasonable acknowledges feelings, fear, hope, anxiety, confidence. Rational ignores them, but those feelings are real. They drive decisions more than formulas do. So the trick is to design your financial life around what you can realistically stick with, not what a textbook says you should do. That's why someone who earns an average return but stays invested for decades often ends up richer than the genius who jumps in and out chasing perfection. Endurance beats brilliance. Reasonable beats rational. Because in the end, money isn't about maximizing every outcome. It's about managing yourself well enough to keep going, year after year, without blowing up. And that matters more than ever because the world has a nasty habit of surprising us. The one thing you can count on with money is surprise. The future never looks like the past. And yet, most of our decisions are based on what just happened, as if history repeats on command. Think about it. Nobody in 2007 was planning for a financial crisis as brutal as the one that hit in 2008. Few people in 2000 expected the tech bubble to implode the way it did. Almost no one in 2019 had global pandemic shutting down the world on their financial forecast. But those surprises reshaped everything. They always do. The problem isn't that we fail to predict. It's that we pretend predicting is possible. We take past data, run it through models, and assume the future will line up neatly. But history doesn't work that way. History is the study of things that surprised everyone. Wars, crashes, revolutions, booms, almost all of them blindsided the experts. So what do? We stop pretending we can forecast the exact future. Instead, we prepare for a range of futures. We accept that volatility, recessions, and setbacks aren't bugs in the system. They're features. They're part of the deal. This is where humility comes in. The right question isn't, what's going to happen? It's what could happen, and how do I make sure I survive it? That shift changes everything. It moves you from forecasting to preparing. Because if surprises are inevitable, resilience beats prediction. It's not about guessing the storm. It's about building a boat that can handle waves you didn't see coming. And that's where margin of safety, the idea of leaving yourself room for error, becomes the most powerful tool you have. Room for error is what keeps you alive when the unexpected hits. It's the financial version of slacking a rope. Without it, the smallest jolt can snap you. With it, you can bend, absorb the shock, and keep going. Here's the truth. Forecasts are fragile. Plans look great on paper until reality throws a curveball. A job loss, a medical bill, a market crash, a war, a pandemic. No model accounts for all of it. That's why the smartest strategy isn't betting on being right. It's betting on being resilient when you're wrong. This is why people keep cash. Not because cash earns much. It doesn't. But because cash buys survival. It lets you pay the bills when the market is down. It buys time when the world freezes. It keeps you from being forced into bad decisions at the worst possible moment. Same with investing. You don't need to maximize every dollar. You need to leave room for mistakes. Diversification, conservative assumptions, buffers, they all sound boring compared to chasing the hottest returns. But they're what allow you to stick around long enough for compounding to work. Think about a pilot. No one designs a plane to handle only perfect weather. They design it to handle turbulence, wind, and storms. That's room for error. Your financial life needs the same design. Not for the best case scenario, but for the inevitable messiness of reality. The irony is, the more room for error you build in, the less you'll need it. Because the confidence it gives you keeps you from panicking. The margin itself becomes a source of calm. And calm decision-making is the real edge in money. But here's the catch. Who you are and what kind of margin you need changes over time. And that's the next lesson. You won't think about money the same way at 40 as you did at 20. And you won't think the same at 60 as you do now. That's the sneaky part about financial planning. The person making the plan today isn't the same person who'll be living with it tomorrow. When you're young, risk looks exciting. You've got time to recover. Losing money feels like a lesson. Fast forward a decade or two, maybe you've got kids, a mortgage, responsibilities stacked high. Suddenly that same risk feels reckless. Later in life, when health and energy matter more than chasing another dollar, priorities shift again. The problem is, we forget we'll change. We lock ourselves into long-term goals as if our future selves will want the same things our present selves do. But future you is a stranger. They'll have different tastes, fears, desires. And that means flexibility is more important than precision. Think about it. How many people have gone to college for one career only to end up in another? How many once dreamed of a mansion but later just wanted a quiet, simple life? How many planned to retire at 65 but either couldn't stand the thought of stopping or couldn't wait that long? Money decisions should account for this. The best plans leave room for evolution. Enough slack to change course without breaking. Enough margin to allow new goals to replace old ones. Because the only guarantee is that you'll change. The economy will change. The world will change. And clinging to rigid plans in a fluid reality is a recipe for regret. And there's another hard truth. Every choice has a cost. Nothing is free. Which is where we go next. Nothing is free. Every benefit has a hidden price tag, and money is no exception. You just don't always see the bill up front. Take investing. The price of high returns isn't printed in a prospectus. It's volatility. It's watching your portfolio drop 30% and resisting the urge to bail. It's stress, uncertainty, and doubt. That's the fee. If you can't stomach it, you don't get the reward. Same with careers. The big salary often comes with long hours, high pressure, missed birthdays, stress that eats at your health. You earn the paycheck, but you pay with time and energy you'll never get back. Even something as simple as owning stocks, the long-term payoff is extraordinary. But the short-term cost is enduring a roller coaster of market swings. People call it risk, but really it's just the price of admission. And too many walk out of the theater because they can't handle the ticket. What makes it tricky is that unlike a store purchase, these prices aren't obvious. When you buy a car, you know what you paid. When you buy into markets, the fee is uncertainty, delivered randomly, without a receipt. That makes it easy to think you can get the gain without the pain. But that's an illusion. The best investors aren't those who avoid the cost. They're the ones willing to pay it, calmly, consistently, over decades. They know nothing is free, and they budget not just dollars, but emotions for the journey. And here's the thing, we're not all paying the same price. What feels like an easy fee for one person might feel unbearable for another, depending on their experiences and their view of the world. Which leads to the next truth. Money isn't just about you. It's about how you and I, with different lives and values, collide in the same market. Money is never just about you. It's always you and me. Your choices collide with mine. Your history bumps into mine. And the tension between those worlds explains why markets feel so chaotic. Think about it. You and I can both look at the same stock. I might be buying because I believe it's cheap. You might be selling because you need the cash for a down payment. Neither of us is crazy. We just have different circumstances. Same market, different lives. This is what makes money so emotional. We're all playing different games, but on the same board. The retiree trying to preserve wealth is playing a different game than the 25-year-old day trader chasing thrills. The hedge fund manager playing with billions is not in the same league as the teacher putting a few hundred into an index fund. Yet all of us influence the same prices. The danger comes when you forget this. When you assume the other person sees the world the way you do. When you think their decision is dumb, instead of realizing they're just playing a different game with different rules. This is why bubbles form. To one person, buying at sky-high prices looks insane. To another, it looks like survival or a bet they have to take. This is also why crashes feel so shocking, because we forget that what makes sense for one group creates pain for another. And here's the deeper truth. No matter how much data or logic we use, we can't erase the fact that personal experiences shape financial decisions far more than spreadsheets ever could. Money isn't a universal language. It's 1,000 dialects colliding in one loud, messy conversation. Which brings us to another universal twist. Despite all our different games, there's one story people always seem to find seductive. The story of doom. The story of pessimism. Pessimism is magnetic. It pulls at us harder than optimism ever does. Tell people the world is ending, and they'll lean in. Tell them things will keep improving, and they'll shrug. Why? Because bad news feels urgent. Good news feels slow, boring, almost invisible. Think about investing. A forecast that stocks will collapse tomorrow makes headlines. A forecast that stocks will grow steadily over the next 20 years? Yawn. One feels like a fire alarm. The other feels like watching grass grow. This is why pessimists often sound smarter. They seem cautious, analytical, grounded in reality. Optimists, by contrast, look naive, too hopeful, too blind to risks. But here's the trick. History is a long story of progress interrupted by short bursts of terror. The long run is almost always up. The short run is chaos. So the optimist is usually right, but the pessimist usually sounds convincing. The danger is that pessimism sells you paralysis. If you believe every scary forecast, you'll never invest, never take risks, never build. And the cost of sitting out can be just as devastating as the cost of being wrong. Of course, it's not about ignoring risk. It's about recognizing the balance. The world is full of problems, recessions, wars, crises, but it's also full of solutions, ingenuity, and progress. Money rewards those who can hold both truths at once. Respect the risks, but don't be seduced into thinking they cancel the future. Because when you lean too far into pessimism, you start believing almost anything that confirms your fears. Which is where the next lesson comes in. When fear or greed takes over, you'll believe almost anything. Logic gets blurry. Stories take the wheel. And money, more than almost any other part of life, is fueled by stories we tell ourselves. Think about bubbles. People don't pile into them because the math makes sense. They pile in because a narrative does. This is the future. This time is different. If I don't buy now, I'll be left behind. Those aren't calculations, they're stories. Stories powerful enough to override common sense. The same happens in crashes. Fear gets so loud that people convince themselves markets will never recover, that cash under the mattress is the only safe move, that the world as we know it is ending. Again, not logic, but stories. And it's not just in markets. Lottery tickets sell because people believe in the story of hope, not because the odds make sense. Ponzi schemes thrive because people believe the story of easy riches. Political promises often win because they sound good, not because they're practical. The human brain craves stories because stories make complexity digestible. The economy is too vast, too tangled for anyone to fully grasp. So we compress it into tales we can carry in our heads. Tales that make us feel safe or excited or part of something bigger. But here's the danger. Once a story takes hold, it doesn't need to be true to be powerful. It just needs to feel true. And when it feels true, people act on it. Sometimes they bet their life savings on it. Sometimes they burn down what they've built because of it. This is why skepticism is essential, not cynicism. That's just another story. Skepticism. The ability to ask, does this narrative actually line up with reality? Or am I just letting emotions write the script? Because in the end, money isn't about cold numbers. It's about what people believe about those numbers. And beliefs are fragile, emotional, contagious, which is why the smartest financial skill may not be math at all. It may be keeping yourself in check when the stories get loud. And that brings us to the final lesson of the journey. The psychology of money isn't about spreadsheets. It's about behavior, about humility, patience, survival, and the quiet confidence to say, I have enough. The stories we've walked through all circle back to one simple truth. Money is not just about numbers. It's about behavior, and behavior is messy. It's emotional. It's inconsistent. But it's also what defines whether you thrive or stumble. If there's one thread tying all this together, it's humility. Humility to admit luck played a role in your wins. Humility to admit risk could take it all tomorrow. Humility to recognize that enough is a ceiling worth respecting. It's also patience. Patience to let compounding work. Patience to ride out volatility without flinching. Patience to accept that wealth isn't built overnight, but over decades of small, boring, repeated choices. It's survival, because the whole game of money is staying in the game, not swinging for perfection, not gambling everything for glory, just enduring. Because if you can endure, the tails eventually work in your favor, and it's control. Not control over markets or luck or other people. You'll never have that. It's control over yourself, over your spending, over your impulses, over your time. That's the form of wealth that actually matters. When you step back, the psychology of money isn't about outsmarting others. It's about not being your own worst enemy. It's about recognizing that no one is crazy. Everyone's just reacting to their own version of the world. It's about choosing reasonable over rational, resilience over brilliance, independence over impressing strangers. And in the end, it's about freedom. The freedom to wake up and say, I can live today on my terms. That's the dividend that matters. That's the return you'll remember. So maybe the most valuable financial skill isn't earning more, or forecasting better, or even investing smarter. Maybe it's simply mastering your own behavior long enough to let time, patience, and compounding do the heavy lifting. Because money, when you strip away the noise, is just a tool. And the goal of that tool isn't to impress or dominate or chase endlessly. The goal is to control your time, to have enough, to live well. That's the psychology of money. No summary can match the richness of the original.